All right, welcome to lesson 3. You just finished dividing integers and multiplying. Now we're going to do order of operations. We do have vocabulary here, power, base, exponent. If you already did chapter 5, then you already have those 3. If you skipped chapter 5, you don't have them, so we need to write them down. Okay, so today we will be able to evaluate an expression that includes grouping symbols, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. So lots of things that it includes. So we're going to start with power. So power is P, which I have on page 15. Okay. So on page 15, power. It's the second one down on the page. So power is a way to represent repeated multiplication. So the reason why I have this bracket here is because I'm representing the whole thing. Normally they don't have the bracket there. I guess that was kind of a bad choice. So 5 squared, so the whole thing. Maybe I'll make it a box. So this whole thing is a power. So 5 squared really means 5 times 5, and then 3 to the x means 3 times 3 times 3, and we don't know how many times because that's a variable. So we put that dot, dot, dot at the end. So my personal connection is that powerful people repeat asking questions until they get their answers. So that's kind of like a power. Powerful people ask questions until they repeat asking questions until they get the answers. Okay. Next we have base. So B is back on page 2. We have to write this one in. So we're on B. And we have to write in the word base. So I just use the next one over. So the number in a power that tells us what will be multiplied repeatedly. So here at 5 squared, or 5 to the second power, 5 is the base. So that means we're going to do 5 times 5. It tells us what we are going to multiply. And 3 to the x would be 3 times 3 times 3. 3 is the base. It tells us what we are going to be multiplied. So it's kind of like a teacher repeatedly asks you if you finished your homework. The question is, did you finish your homework? You might not know how many times I'm going to ask you that during the day. Sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's never. Okay? But that's what they're asking, not how many times they ask it. Okay, and then we have exponent, which starts with an E, which is on page 5. Again, this is one that you have to write in. So exponent, we're on E, page 5, we have to write it in. Okay, the raised number in a power, so raised means it's a little bit higher up, telling us how many times. So how many is the key word here. I should have underlined that. How many times to repeat the multiplication. So 5 squared means 5 times 5. We did it 2 times because of that 2. 3 to the x is the exponent. So we're going to do 3 times 3 times 3, dot, 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 and x amount of times. We don't know how many times. But there'd be an x number if we counted. Okay, it'd be like you asked your mom to go to the mall 9 times. 9 would be the exponent because that's how many times you've repeatedly asked. Okay, so here we go with our building background is just to remember GERMDAS. So G stands for grouping symbols. Whoa, I spelled grouping wrong. That's a U. Sorry. Okay, grouping symbols, which means we could have parentheses, could be brackets, it could be absolute value is what we learned in chapter 4, and now we know it could also mean this really long dividing sign. Okay, then we have E and R, which means exponents and radicals, which we will have some today. So remember, exponents means like something to the x power. Okay, then we're going to multiply and divide left to right. The big part is divide, it's left to right. And then we're going to add and subtract left to right. Left to right. So whichever one comes first when we go left to right. So number 1, we're going to evaluate the expression -5 minus negative times -2. Okay, so what's really important to understand is that there's multiplying here, and this is subtracting. So this is why I like to put negatives in parentheses, and I didn't really do that in this one. Okay, So first thing we're always going to do is we're going to change adding, or change subtracting to adding the opposite. So I'm going to keep this -5 because that's a negative. I'm going to change this subtracting to adding. And then the opposite of this 5, it's positive, so it's going to be a -5. And then times -2. And that's a negative sign because there's a multiplying there. Okay? And we can't do times minus. That would make sense. So times a negative. So now there's no grouping symbols. There's no exponents or radicals. There is multiplying. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do the -5 times -2. We multiply first. So when we multiply, we do 5 times 2. 5 times 2 is 10. And it's a negative times a negative. And I know a negative and a negative make a positive when I multiply because I'm subtracting 5 two times. Okay, so then I have 10. I'm going to write this down in the exact order. It's really important. -5 plus 10. So now I'm going to actually add -5 plus 10. I have a negative and a positive. So with a negative and a positive, I subtract. 10 minus 5 is 5. And I have more positives, so I get +5. Okay, number 2, we're going to evaluate the expression -2 plus the quantity of -4 squared. So there's no subtracting here to change, so we don't need to worry about that. So I need to decide, am I going to add first or do exponents first? And the first thing we're going to do is the exponent. So we have -2 plus, parentheses, -4 squared. So -4 squared means -4 times -4. So 4 times 4, if you need to use your multiplication chart, you can. 4 times 4 is 16. And again, a negative times a negative equals a positive. So I get +16. Now I'm going to add -2 plus 16. So I have positive and a negative, so I'm going to subtract. 16 minus 2 would be 14. And I have more positives, so I get a +14. Okay, number 3, evaluate the expressions. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to substitute p equals 4. Okay, so I'm going to say parenthesis, I'm going to copy it exactly. 13 plus bracket -5 plus p is 4, divided by -2 minus 8. Oh, I forgot parenthesis. I did not copy it exactly. Golly. Okay, I'm going to change subtracting to adding the opposite. And I'm not going to rewrite it. I'm just going to sneak it in there. So I'm going to change the subtracting to adding, but it goes from a +8 to a -8. Okay. Now I'm going to start with the grouping symbols. So I'm going to start with the brackets first, because those are on the inside. So -5 plus 4. I have a positive and a negative, so I subtract. 5 minus 4 is 1, and I have more negatives, so I get -1, and I still have this parenthesis. So plus 13, and I drop everything down, divided by -2 plus -8. So I still have grouping symbols, so I did the brackets, now I'm going to do the parentheses. So 13 plus -1. I have a positive and a negative, so I subtract. 13 minus 1 is 12. And I have more positives. I don't need the parentheses anymore because I did what's inside of them. So 12 divided by -2 plus -8. What's really important is some people get impatient and they want to start working on this. We don't want to work on that until we have everything written down, because now we are going to divide. Because after grouping symbols, we do exponents and roots, and there's none of those. then we multiply and divide. So I'm going to divide 12 divided by negative 2. So 12 divided by 2 is 6, and I want to think, does 6 times negative 2 equal positive 12? It does not, so it needs to be negative 6 plus negative 8. They're both negative. So one last thing to do now is to add. When they're both negative, we add and keep the sign. So 6 plus 8 is 14. They're both negative, so it's negative 14. Okay, back side. 2 more, I think. Yep. Number 4, evaluate the expression. Negative 9 minus x times the quantity of the absolute value of negative 10 and minus y minus y. I don't know, it's hard to say. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to substitute in the values. For the variables. So I'm going to say variables, I guess. Okay, so I have a negative 9 minus x, which is 5, parenthesis, absolute value, negative 10, minus y, which is 7, absolute value, minus y, which is 7, parenthesis. And then going to change subtracting to adding the opposite. Okay, and I'll use a different color so you can see what I'm changing. So I'm going to change this subtracting to adding, and this goes from a positive 5 to a negative 5. This subtracting here goes to adding, and it goes from a positive 7 to a negative 7. And again here, this subtracting goes to adding, and it goes from a positive 7 to a negative 7. Okay, so we're going to start with the grouping symbols. We just start whatever's on the most inside. So if I go, this is sandwiched with this one, but inside of this sandwich is this guy here. So we're going to start with the absolute value first. Okay, so negative 10 plus negative 7. If they're both negative, that means we're going to add and keep the sign. So 10 plus 7 is 17, and it'll be a negative 17 plus negative 7. Okay, again, I'm not going to get too excited and work on this. I need to do the parentheses first. So again, I have to actually do that absolute value. So absolute value of a negative 17, how far is it from 0? It's 17 spots away from 0. Keep everything else the same. Okay, so now I have to do the parentheses. So I have negative 9 plus a negative 5. Okay, 17 plus negative 7. I have a positive and a negative, so I subtract. 17 minus 7 is 10. And I have more positive, so it'll be positive 10. Now I have two options. Either when these two are right next to each other, I have a number right next to the parenthesis. That means I'm going to multiply. So you can write this using multiplying, or you can just keep it in parentheses and know that we're multiplying those two. Okay. So next we're going to multiply, because that comes before addition. So we're going to multiply negative 5 and 10. So 5 times 10 is 50, and a negative times a positive is a negative. So negative 50 plus negative 9. Keep it in the exact same order. And now we are going to actually do the addition. Okay, so negative 9 plus 50, they're both negative, so we just add them. So 50 plus 9 is 59. Keep it negative. Okay, number 5, last one. We're going to evaluate the expression. So here we actually do have multiple grouping symbols. So first thing I'm going to do is change subtracting to adding the opposite. I don't know why I didn't abbreviate that, but that's okay. So I'm going to copy it exactly. I'm just going to change all these subtracting signs to adding the opposite. So I have 19 I'm going to change this subtracting to adding, and the opposite of 8 is negative 8. And then times 3 over negative 3. I'm going to change that subtracting to adding. The opposite of 6 is negative 6. Minus, I'm going to change that to adding. The opposite of negative 10 is positive 10. Okay, so now we have grouping symbols. So the big grouping symbol here that I want to make sure that we realize is the long dividing sign. So what that means is this guy here, we have to figure out what's on top and we have to figure out what's on bottom before we do anything else off to the side. Okay? So on top, we actually have to do the parentheses. So we're going to do the parentheses first. So 19 plus negative 8. If I have positive and a negative, I subtract. 19 minus 8 is 8. And I'm more positive, so 8 times 3 is on top, over negative 3 plus negative 6, and then plus 10. Okay, so now I have to do on top 8 times 3. I have to get this all to one number. So top and bottom. Need to be one number. Okay, so 8 times 3 is 24. Over, on the bottom I can do that at the same time. Negative 3 plus negative 6. I have two negatives, so I'm going to add. So 3 plus 6 is 9, and that's not going to divide. I think I wrote something down wrong, or I must have typed it wrong. Let's make this a negative 3. So negative 3 plus negative 3, I made this a 3. Okay, they're both negative, so we're going to add, and so 3 plus 3 is 6. They're both negative, so I keep the negative, plus 10. So now am I going to divide or add first? The next thing I would do is division. So 24 divided by negative 6. 24 divided by 6 is 4. And a positive divided by a negative is a negative, because negative times a negative is a positive. Plus 10. And so now we add negative 4 plus 10. And I have a negative and a positive, so I subtract. 10 minus 4 is 6, and I have more positives. So I'd end up with a positive 6. Okay, summary. We're always going to change subtracting to adding the opposite. Okay, we use order of operations to help us correctly evaluate. Expressions. Okay, addition, multiplication, and division rules are all different. So notice here I had negative 4 plus 10. I had to subtract them. Okay, here when I did a positive divided by a negative, I get a negative. They're different. Okay. And a reminder, this I don't know if I talked about before, so I wanted to talk about it. When they're in parentheses, negative 2 to the 4th means negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. So negative 2 times negative 2 would be a positive 4 times negative 2 times negative 2. 4 times negative 2 would be a negative 8 times negative 2 would be a positive 16. Okay, but when I do negative 2 to the 4th, if it's not in parentheses, that means I'm going to actually do negative and then 2 to the 4th. So it's actually going to be negative 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, which would be negative 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. So that would be negative parentheses 16, which is negative 16. So those are two different problems. I don't think I'm going to give you this one too much this year, but I just want to make sure you know. All right, that's it. Sorry this video is so long. Okay, bye.